The scent of expensive roses filled the grand banquet hall, their petals cascading over lavish, gold-trimmed tables, a delicate touch of luxury that masked the tension simmering beneath the surface. The towering crystal chandeliers above bathed the hall in a warm golden glow, their light bouncing off the polished marble floors. Laughter rang through the air, elegant guests in shimmering gowns and pressed tuxedos toasting to the most beautiful bride, my sister, Isabella. The string quartet played a soft waltz in the background, their melody threading seamlessly through the hum of conversations and the clinking of fine china. I balanced a heavy tray of champagne flutes in my shaking hands, sweat trickling down my spine. The shimmering crystal glasses clinked as I weaved through the sea of guests, careful not to spill a single drop. The scent of roasted duck and honey, glazed pastries filled the air, mingling with the floral perfume of the wealthy socialites gathered in clusters. My mother's sharp voice cut through the festive air. Faster! Naomi, you're embarrassing me. Her eyes, cold and scrutinizing, flicked over me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience rather than her daughter. I bit my lip and nodded, fighting the sting behind my eyes. It wasn't enough that Isabella was having the wedding of the century, with every luxury money could buy. It wasn't enough that my parents had spent their entire fortune making sure she married into an even wealthier family. No, what truly drove the knife in deeper was that they had forced me to work at my own sister's wedding, like some unpaid servant. The humiliation burned in my chest. You will never be successful like your sister, Isabella had sneered earlier that day, her expensive lace veil trailing behind her as she glanced at me in my simple, worn-out dress. You were born to serve, Naomi, not to be celebrated. Her laughter had echoed through the bridal suite, drowning out the sound of my own heart shattering. Her words replayed in my mind, twisting like a cruel echo. And as I stood there, dodging guests who barely spared me a glance, I clenched my fists, my grip tightening around the tray. But what none of them knew, what none of them even suspected, was that my life was about to change forever. The grand entrance doors swung open with a dramatic creak, and a sudden hush fell over the room. All eyes turned toward the tall, striking man standing at the threshold. A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd, whispers darting from one guest to another like a wildfire. Who is that? Someone whispered, dressed in a tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than the entire wedding venue. His presence was undeniable. He exuded power, an aura of quiet command that made even the wealthiest guests in the room shift uncomfortably. His sharp, defined features were illuminated by the soft golden light, his dark eyes scanning the hall with a deliberate, measured gaze. My heart lurched in my chest. It was him, my husband, the man I had married in secret, the man my family had no idea about. Isabella, oblivious to my connection with the mysterious guest, smirked as she approached me. Naomi, make sure you serve that man well. He looks important. Maybe, if you're lucky, he'll tip you enough to buy a real dress. Her fingers idly traced the pearls draped around her neck, her expression dripping with condescension. She tossed her hair and laughed, turning back toward her new husband, whose own amusement mirrored hers. I inhaled sharply, my hands trembling as I set the tray down on the nearest table. the weight of my family's mockery. Their endless taunts had burdened me for years. But now, standing here, I felt something stir within me, a shift, a reckoning. I lifted my chin as my husband's piercing gaze met mine across the room. A slow, knowing smile spread across his lips as he began walking toward me. The polished floor beneath him seemed to tremble with each step he took, his stride confident, unhurried, and the moment he opened his mouth to speak, the entire wedding came to a standstill. "Excuse me," his deep, rich voice rang through the hall, commanding absolute attention. "Why is my wife serving drinks at this event?" Gasps erupted from every corner of the room. The tray in my hands nearly slipped. My mother's face drained of color. Isabella's smirk shattered into an expression of pure disbelief. "Dua!" My father sputtered, his voice barely above a whisper. My husband's eyes never left mine as he stepped forward. He reached for my hand, his grip warm and reassuring, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in silent comfort. "Naomi, you don't belong here," he murmured softly. "Not as a servant." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my body shaking. My family had treated me like I was worthless, like I would never amount to anything. But they had no idea who I had become, and they certainly had no idea who I had married. My mother broke the silence first, her voice shrill with panic. "This is a mistake. Naomi can't be married. She's useless. She doesn't have anything to offer a man like you." My husband's gaze darkened, his fingers tightening around mine. "Useless?" he repeated, his voice a quiet storm. "Funny. The woman you call useless just so happens to be the person I trust most in this world." Isabella's lips curled in disgust. "You're lying," she snapped. "There's no way someone like her is married to a man like you." My husband let out a low chuckle, his amusement cold and calculated. "Would you like proof?" He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Within moments, a large image flashed onto the giant event projector, our wedding photo. Me in a stunning silk gown. Him holding me close. A moment captured in time, undeniable and real. Gasps rippled through the guests. Isabella staggered back, her hand clapping over her mouth. And in that moment, I realized something. For years, I had been made to feel small, worthless, but not anymore. Now it was their turn to feel powerless. As the shock settled in, my husband turned to me, his eyes filled with something warm. The weight of the moment hung between us, heavy yet liberating. "Naomi," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Are you ready to leave?" I hesitated, my gaze shifting toward the wedding servers, young girls who were being treated exactly as I had been. Their weary faces mirrored the past version of myself, the one who had once believed she had no way out. I took a deep breath, my resolve strengthening. "No," I said, "not yet." My husband arched a brow, intrigued. The murmurs in the hall had yet to die down, eyes still darting between me and my family, the weight of my words sinking into their bones. I turned toward the servers and stepped forward, my voice steady and clear. "To everyone working tonight," I announced, "this is the last event you will ever serve at under these conditions. If you want a new job, one that pays well and treats you with respect, come see me." A few servers gasped, exchanging stunned looks, hands tightening round the trays they held. Hope flickered in their expressions, hesitant but undeniable. My mother's face contorted in fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice low but filled with venom. I looked at her, my voice unwavering. I'm showing kindness, the very thing you never showed me. My father tried to protest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. But my husband placed a firm hand on his shoulder, silencing him before a single word could escape. Don't, he said. You've already lost her. And with that, we turned and walked out together. The night air was crisp against my skin as I stepped outside, my heart light for the first time in years. The stars above shimmered like silent witnesses to my long-awaited freedom. I had spent my entire life believing I wasn't enough. But tonight, as I left that place behind, I realized the truth. I had always been more than enough. And now the world would finally see it too. As we stepped into the limousine waiting outside, my hands trembled slightly. The wedding hall was still buzzing with gasps and frantic whispers behind us, but I didn't look back. I turned to my husband, Adrian. His fingers brushed against mine, a silent reassurance that I was no longer alone. He studied me for a moment before speaking. You didn't have to do that, he murmured, helping the servers. You could have walked out and left them behind, just like they left you. I swallowed, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. I know, I admitted, but I couldn't. I know what it's like to be powerless, to be treated like nothing. I exhaled slowly. If I can make a difference for them, then I will. Adrian's gaze softened, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he reached for my hand and squeezed it. The warmth of his touch grounded me, a silent reminder that I was no longer trapped in the world that had sought. You're stronger than you realize, Naomi. For the first time in years, I believed him. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee in our penthouse, the inevitable happened. The soft aroma of roasted beans filled the air, blending with the distant hum of the city below. The sprawling skyline stretched beyond the glass walls, but my focus remained on the phone buzzing relentlessly beside me. Mother, then Isabella, then father, one after another. Their names flashed across the screen, their desperation leaking through their frantic messages. Naomi, this is ridiculous. You embarrassed us last night. Call me. You think you're better than us now. You will never be family again after this. Naomi, we need to talk. Your actions have put us in a difficult position. I set the phone down unimpressed, my fingers lightly tapping against the sleek marble countertop. They finally realized they lost control over me. I mused aloud, my voice calm but laced with finality. Adrian smirked from across the table, his sharp features illuminated by the morning sun filtering through the sheer curtains. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his espresso lazily. Did you expect anything less? No, I admitted, exhaling slowly. But I did expect them to at least pretend to be apologetic. Adrian's expression darkened slightly, his smirk fading into something more serious. They never thought they'd need to. To them, you were never meant to be the one with power. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was exhausted, as if years of their manipulation had finally weighed down on me all at once. And then the next message came from an unknown number. You think your rich husband makes you untouchable? Watch what happens next. A chill ran down my spine. The message was curt, dripping with malice. Isabella, and she wasn't done playing games. The next few days passed in a blur of luxury and peace. Rooftop dinners with Adrian, quiet evenings wrapped in the warmth of our home. But a shadow of unease lingered at the back of my mind. And then, just when I had begun to lower my guard, it all came crashing down. Adrian had been away at a business meeting when I decided to visit a charity event downtown. I had begun working on a foundation to help young women gain financial independence, something I wished I had growing up. The event was held at an elegant venue, chandeliers casting golden light over the hopeful faces of those seeking change. But as I stepped out of the venue, the world around me tilted. A black SUV screeched to a halt in front of me, the sound of tires skidding against pavement, sending a spike of fear through my chest. Before I could react, two men in dark suits emerged, their movements swift and rehearsed. A cloth pressed against my mouth, chemicals filling my lungs, and then darkness. I awoke in a dimly lit warehouse, the scent of oil and dust heavy in the air. My head throbbed, my vision swimming as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. Cold metal scraped against my wrists. My hands were tied behind my back, my ankles bound. And standing in front of me, arms crossed, was Isabella. She looked immaculate as ever, silk blouse unwrinkled, diamonds glinting against her skin. But her expression was anything but composed. "You just had to humiliate me, didn't you?" She spat, her perfect features twisted in rage. I swallowed hard, my head still spinning. "This is insane, Isabella," I rasped. "You had the perfect wedding. What more do you want?" Her eyes blazed, a fire of jealousy and resentment burning deep within them. "You ruined everything," she seethed. "Do you know what people are saying? How you overshadowed me on my own wedding day? The whispers, the pity. Do you think I'll let you get away with that?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You kidnapped me because of your ego." She leaned in, her breath hot against my face, her voice sharp and cutting. "I kidnapped you," she whispered, "because I refused to let you win." And with that, she stepped back and turned to the men standing in the shadows. Their presence had been looming, silent and watchful, but at her command they stepped forward. "Make sure she suffers," she ordered, a cruel smile curling on her lips. "But don't kill her." Yet, I had always known Isabella was cruel. But this was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. Adrian would come for me. I knew he would, but I couldn't just wait. I needed to get out. My fingers worked frantically at the knots binding my wrists, the coarse rope biting into my skin. My mind raced through every escape tactic I had ever learned, every moment of survival I had endured over the years. I had survived years of being treated like nothing. I had endured humiliation, pain, betrayal, and I had fought my way out. I would not let Isabella win this time. Taking a deep breath, I whispered to myself, "You are stronger than this." Then, with one final yank, the ropes fell loose and the fight was just beginning. By the time Isabella returned, I was ready. She entered the warehouse, expecting to see me still bound. Instead, she found me standing, free. Her eyes widened in shock. How? I didn't give her time to react. With one swift motion, I grabbed the chair I had been tied to and swung it hard. The impact sent Isabella sprawling to the ground, a stunned gasp escaping her lips. The men she had hired rushed toward me. But before they could reach me, a deafening sound echoed through the warehouse. Gunshots. Get away from my wife. My heart nearly stopped as he stepped into the room. Adrian, his bodyguards flooded in behind him. Chaos erupted, and in the end, Isabella lost everything. The police arrived soon after, and Isabella's smug arrogance crumbled as she was handcuffed. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked, her voice hysterical. But no one listened. For the first time in her life, she was powerless. As she was dragged away, she turned to me one last time, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think this is over?" she hissed. I met her gaze, unflinching. "It already is." And with that, she was gone. The flashing cameras were relentless. Headlines splashed across every major news outlet. Bride's sister kidnapped at her wedding by her own family. Socialite Isabella Royce arrested. Wedding scandal shakes high society. The world was watching. I sat in the back of Adrian's luxury car, my hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea as the vehicle cut through the city streets. The chaos of the past week lingered in my mind, and I exhaled slowly, trying to process everything. Isabella was in jail. My parents had gone into hiding, their perfect image shattered beyond repair. And me, I had survived. Adrian's hand covered mine. "You're safe now," he murmured, watching me with concern. I turned to him, my throat tight with emotion. I never expected her to go that far. I admit it. I thought she hated me, but kidnapping, trying to hurt me. Adrian's jaw clenched. "People like her don't know how to lose, Naomi. When you stood up for yourself, she saw it as an attack. And when she realized she couldn't control you anymore, she tried to destroy me." I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. Adrian nodded. "But she failed." I looked out the window as we pulled into the underground parking lot of our penthouse. "She failed," I echoed, but deep inside, I still felt the remnants of fear. Because I knew people like Isabella, and I knew she wasn't done yet. The next morning, as I scrolled through the news on my phone, a familiar name popped up. Eleanor and Richard Royce speak out. We had no idea what our daughter was planning. I scoffed. So this was their game now, playing the innocent, devastated parents who had been completely unaware of Isabella's crimes. Adrian, sitting across from me at the breakfast table, raised an eyebrow. "They're trying to save themselves." "Of course they are," I muttered, setting my phone down. "They don't care about me. They only care about their reputation." I had expected them to at least try and reach out to me privately. But no, my parents had chosen the media as their audience. Because to them, this was just another scandal to fix. "They'll probably say they stand by Isabella next," I said bitterly. Adrian sipped his coffee. "And if they do," I met his gaze, "then they can rot with her." For the first time in my life, I meant it. Later that day, a knock echoed through the penthouse. I wasn't expecting visitors. Adrian opened the door, and to my utter disbelief, my mother stood there. She looked different. The usual sharp elegance of her features was replaced by exhaustion. Her once pristine hair was slightly disheveled, and there were deep lines around her eyes. "Naomi," she said quietly. I crossed my arms. "Why are you here?" She hesitated. Then, because I was wrong, I let out a humorless laugh. "Now that's something I never thought I'd hear from you." She flinched. Adrian watched from the side, his expression unreadable. You have every reason to hate me, she admitted. I never believed in you. I treated you like a servant. I favored Isabella over you. And she stopped, swallowing hard. I stared at her, waiting. I let her do what she did to you, she whispered. A bitter taste filled my mouth. You let her. I repeated. My mother lifted her eyes, and for the first time I saw something real in them. Guilt. She told me she wanted revenge, she said. I thought she meant something petty, that she would humiliate you in public. I I never thought she'd take it so far. You're lying. She shook her head, and to my shock, her hands trembled. I swear to you, Naomi, I didn't know she was going to kidnap you. I would never. She trailed off, her voice breaking. I sucked in a breath. For years I had dreamed of hearing these words. I had wanted my mother to admit she was wrong. But now that she had, it didn't change the past. You only came because your name is being dragged through the mud, I said coldly. My mother's eyes darkened. I came because I lost both my daughters. Isabella is gone, and I'm free. I interrupted. She stared at me for a long moment before nodding. Yes, she murmured, you are. Then, with a small, hesitant glance at Adrian, she turned and walked away. I should have felt satisfied, but instead, an ache settled deep in my chest. Adrian pulled me into his arms the moment the door closed. You don't have to forgive her, he murmured. I exhaled shakily, pressing my forehead against his chest. I don't know if I can, I admitted. But maybe that's okay. He kissed the top of my head. It is okay, Naomi. And for the first time, I believed it. I thought it was over. But Isabella had one last move to play. A letter arrived at our doorstep. No return address. I hesitated before opening it. The moment I saw the handwriting, my stomach twisted. It was from her. You think you've won, but I always have a way out, dear sister. I'll be seeing you soon. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. My hands trembled as I crushed the letter. Adrian read over my shoulder, his expression turning to steel. She's still dangerous, he murmured. I met his gaze. Then we'll be ready, because I wasn't the same Naomi anymore. And Isabella, she no longer had control over me. Months passed. Isabella remained in prison, but I never let my guard down. My foundation flourished, growing into something bigger than I had ever imagined. Women who had been overlooked, mistreated, and belittled were given a fresh start, just like I had always dreamed. Adrian stood by my side every step of the way, and with every challenge, I grew stronger. One day, as we walked through the bustling foundation headquarters, he squeezed my hand. You did this, he said softly. Not because of revenge, not because of them, but because you wanted to help others. I smiled, warmth filling my heart. Maybe that's the best kind of victory, I murmured. Adrian kissed me, slow and deep. And for the first time in my life, I knew I had finally won. The past would always be there, but it no longer defined me. Isabella would one day get out of prison, but I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had built something greater, a legacy, a new life. And as I stood at the top of the city, looking out over everything I had built, I knew I was finally free. Life teaches us that true strength comes not from seeking revenge, but from rising above the pain and building something greater. Naomi's journey shows us that we are not defined by our past or by those who try to break us. We have the power to rewrite our own story. No matter how others try to control or belittle you, remember that your success is the best answer. Thank you for watching my channel. And don't forget to check out more exciting and inspiring videos. See you in the next one. Once upon a time, in a busy city filled with towering buildings and the hum of restless lives, people whispered about a strange village, a place where women never grew old, a village that was not on any map. Idris, a journalist who loved mysteries and the thrill of the unknown, heard the story. He asked old people about Louisa. Their faces turned serious. Their voices dropped to whispers. Their hands clutched at charms and amulets. Forget it, they warned. Some places should stay lost. But Idris didn't listen. He wanted the truth. He searched books, old newspapers, and forgotten stories in dimly lit libraries and archives coated with dust. He found nothing, no records, no proof, just missing people, those who had searched for Louisa before him. Some articles hinted at strange disappearances, reports of travelers who went looking for Louisa but were never seen again. Their names were footnotes in history, their fates lost to time. Then he met an old man named Obi in a dark, quiet room filled with the scent of burning wood and the weight of unspoken truths. Idris asked about Louisa. Obi stared at him for a long time, his lips pressed together as if sealing away a secret too dangerous to reveal. Then he whispered, Louisa is real, but some truths should stay buried, a warning Idris ignored. With an old map and scattered clues, he set off. The road stretched far, winding past villages with thatched roofs and small market stalls before disappearing into dirt trails covered with fog. Villagers along the way refused to speak about Louisa. Some looked away, some whispered prayers under their breath, some shut their doors with a finality that sent a shiver down his spine. Idris didn't stop. Days passed. His feet hurt, his food ran low. The path became harder. His body ached, his clothes clung to his skin, soaked in sweat, yet he kept going. The sun rose and fell, the trees whispered in the wind, and the nights grew colder. One night, by a campfire, an old traveler with a face carved by time spoke. Turn back, he said, his voice like dry leaves rustling. No one returns from Louisa. Idris gripped his notebook. He had come too far. Then he saw it. A thick mist rolled over the land, moving like a slow wave, curling through the trees like grasping fingers. It was unlike any fog he had ever seen. The air buzzed with something unseen, something that made his skin crawl. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The silence was too perfect, too absolute, as if the world held its breath. Idris stepped forward. The fog lifted, and there it was, Louisa, a perfect village, streets filled with happy voices, markets bursting with fruit, children playing, women laughing. The scent of fresh bread and ripe mangoes hung in the air. Warm smiles greeted him. Women walked with grace, their skin smooth, their eyes bright. Not a single wrinkle, not a single gray hair. Idris frowned. They all looked the same age, 20, maybe 25. Their beauty was unnatural, untouched by the wear of life. He asked their ages. They only smiled. Their eyes flickered for a moment, just a brief second, but he saw it, hesitation. Then he saw the men. Bent backs, wrinkled faces, hollow eyes. They didn't smile. They didn't speak, they only watched. Their clothes hung loose on their frail bodies, their hands marked with veins like old riverbeds. The contrast was clear. The women glowed with youth. The men carried the weight of time. A feast began in Idris's honor. Plates were filled with steaming dishes. Drinks were poured into carved wooden cups. Laughter echoed like a melody in the night. The women danced and clapped, their feet light against the earth. But the men sat still, their hands resting in their laps, their faces empty, their eyes shadowed with something close to sorrow. Idris watched closely. Something wasn't right. The food was rich, the drink sweet, but he had lost his appetite. His skin tingled. Every time he looked up, he caught one of the men staring at him. Their eyes held something strange, something close to fear. Then a hand grabbed his wrist. An old man leaned close, his breath shaky, his fingers trembling as they dug into Idris's arm. His eyes, clouded with age, held urgency, desperation. "Leave before the well takes you." Idris's heart pounded. He turned to ask more, but the man was gone, vanished into the crowd as if he had never been there at all. The night stretched longer. The laughter sounded hollow. The smiles felt forced. The warmth felt cold. Shadows stretched too far, and the air carried whispers that didn't belong to the wind. Louisa was not what it seemed. The perfection felt wrong. Something was being hidden, and deep inside, Idris knew he was not supposed to be here. He walked through the village, taking in every detail. The sun cast a golden glow on the streets. Laughter rang through the air. The women of Louisa moved gracefully, their faces untouched by time. Not a single wrinkle, not a single wrinkle, not a single gray hair. Each woman looked no older than 25, their beauty effortless, their skin flawless, their hands soft and unmarked by labor. He spoke to them, asked about their lives, their families, their history. They smiled warmly, their voices soft and musical, their laughter light as air. But when he asked about their ages, the smiles lingered too long, frozen in place. Their eyes flickered, just for a moment, just enough to reveal something unspoken, something hidden beneath the charm of their perfect faces. One woman laughed lightly. "Age doesn't matter here," she said, her fingers idly tracing the rim of a delicate cup. Another touched her smooth cheek, her eyes unreadable. "Time is kind to us." But Idris saw the way their fingers twitched, how their gazes shifted ever so slightly. They weren't answering. They were hiding something. Then he saw the men. They were nothing like the women. Bent backs, deep wrinkles, skin that had lost its strength, their eyes hollow, their movements slow, almost mechanical. They sat on wooden stools outside their homes, barely speaking, their hands resting limply in their laps. They watched the women move with effortless energy, but they did not join them. Idris approached one of the older men, offering a polite nod. The man returned the gesture, but did not smile. His hands trembled slightly as he raised a cup to his lips, the liquid inside dark as ink. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse, worn by time and silence. "You're a guest. Enjoy the village while you can." Idris hesitated. "While I can." The old man did not answer. He moved to another. The same sunken eyes, the same silence, the same lingering fear. The contrast was clear. The women were untouched by time, glowing with vitality. But the men, The men seemed drained of life. Something was wrong. The men did not dance. They did not laugh. They sat in the background, their hands still, their heads low. Then a cold hand gripped his wrist. He turned sharply. An elderly man, his face lined with age, stared at him with wide, desperate eyes. His clothes were worn, frayed at the edges, and his hands trembled slightly. His voice was barely a whisper. "Leave before the well takes you." Idris's breath hitched. He opened his mouth to ask what he meant, but before he could speak, the man was gone, swallowed by the crowd. The laughter around him grew louder, the music faster, but now it all felt forced, like actors playing a scene for an audience that had long since left. Long after the village had gone to sleep, Idris remained awake. The words haunted him. "The well takes you." He moved carefully, slipping between the shadows of the village, past empty homes and quiet streets. He followed a narrow path toward the temple, his steps silent against the dirt. Then he saw it, a staircase hidden beneath a wooden trapdoor, partially covered by loose straw and dry leaves. He descended slowly, the air turning thick and damp as he moved deeper underground. The scent of earth and something metallic hung heavy in the air. At the bottom, in the center of a vast chamber, it stood, a glowing well. Its waters shimmered, casting eerie reflections on the walls around it. Carvings of screaming men twisted in agony, their bodies stretched as if being pulled into the depths. Above them, a single name was etched into stone, Joko. The well pulsed as if alive. Idris took a step closer, heart pounding. The air felt heavier here, pressing against his chest. He leaned in slightly, peering into the shimmering depths, and for a brief moment he thought he saw faces, distorted, pleading, beneath the surface. Then, footsteps. He turned sharply, pressing himself against the wall. Someone was coming. Idris held his breath as figures emerged from the darkness, women draped in flowing robes, their movements slow and precise. At the front stood an elderly woman, the village matriarch. They circled the well, chanting in an ancient tongue. Their voices rose and fell, a rhythm both beautiful and unsettling, like a song sung to forgotten gods. Then, one by one, they drank from the well. The water shimmered as their lips touched it, and for a brief moment their faces changed, a flicker, a shadow of something older, something ancient, before their youth returned, skin tightening, eyes brightening. Idris's stomach twisted. This was why they never aged. The well sustained them. But how? At what cost? His eyes darted to the carvings of the screaming men, the drained men of Louisa. The fear in their eyes. It wasn't just water. It was taking something from them. A life for youth. A price paid in silence. Idris's breath came shallow. He needed to leave. His foot scraped against the stone floor. The chanting stopped. A hush fell over the chamber. The matriarch turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, sharp as blades. She had heard him. Idris's pulse roared in his ears. He could not be caught. He could not be the next prize. Idris ran, lungs burning, legs barely keeping up. Behind him, the earth trembled, the village tearing itself apart. Houses crumbled, streets cracked, the well roared with a monstrous cry. Screams filled the air. Then, silence. Dust rose like a thick curtain, swallowing everything. Then nothing. He stopped, gasping for breath, and turned. Louisa was gone. No ruins, no ashes, just an empty clearing, untouched, as if nothing had ever stood there. The laughter,